Hello, everyone. After the heavy rainy seasons, my garden is just like a small forest. Newly planted mango tree is growing nicely. I don't know it is true or not, but the mango is Miyazaki mango from Japan. I will find out it after 5 years. Anyway, today's podcast is about forest. Stay tuned and stay safe.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This time, we're taking a close look at deforestation.
Always a hot topic.
Yeah, it is. And we've got a ton of research, articles, real-world examples.
Globally.
Oh, yeah, globally.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to focus on Southeast Asia, especially Bali.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we want to figure out, why deforestation matters, not just for, the planet as a whole, but, for you listening right now.
For me.
Yeah. For you. So get this. In 2023, we lost a huge amount of forest, almost 10 football fields every minute.
Wow.
Yeah.
Every minute. That's crazy.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
So I think to kick things off, we got to start with the climate change connection.
Obviously, right.
Yeah, because it's a huge topic these days. But how does getting rid of all these trees actually make climate change worse?
Well, you know how people keep saying that forests are like carbon sinks?
Yeah, they suck up the CO2, right?
Right. Exactly. They absorb all that carbon dioxide from the air, which, helps keep our climate stable. But when we just chop down forests, all that stored carbon, it goes right back into the atmosphere.
Oh, so it's like a double whammy. We're
Yes.
putting out more AD, taking away the thing that cleans it up.
Exactly.
So, okay, how does all this affect me, the average person? Is it really going to change my life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All those extra emissions, they mean we get more extreme weather, like super intense heat waves, crazy rainfall, floods, and really long droughts.
Oh, so it's not just the polar bears are sad.
No, this is going to hit you in your wallet. It affects agriculture, our infrastructure, and ultimately, your everyday life. Think about more power outages because the grid can't handle the weather, or the price of food going way up because crops are failing.
Wow, that makes it way more real than melting ice caps or whatever.
Right.
But it's not just climate change, right? We also keep hearing about biodiversity loss. What's the link between that and deforestation?
So forests are these incredibly diverse ecosystems. Did you know that over 80% of all land species live in forests?
Really?
Yeah. So when we clear forests, we're not just getting rid of trees. We're destroying habitats and pushing so many species towards extinction.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around that kind of loss.
It is.
Is there an example that really shows how bad this could get?
I mean, think about Southeast Asian rainforests. Kind of like the Amazon, they're facing this potential tipping point.
A tipping point.
Yeah. Scientists are warning us that if we keep cutting down trees, and with climate change getting worse, these lush rainforests could turn into a barren savanna.
Whoa, okay. That's a bit scary, especially since a lot of people depend on rainforests for their livelihoods. But is this tipping point idea, widely accepted? Is there another side to that argument?
Well, the exact timeline and what will trigger such a big change, that's still up for debate. But the science behind it, that's pretty clear. Cutting down trees makes the rainforest weaker, less resilient. That makes it easier for droughts and fires to take hold, which then just speeds up the decline.
So it's this awful downward spiral.
Yeah, pretty much.
So even if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, it sounds like the consequences are still really bad. I remember from the prep, the sources also mentioned something called ecosystem services, which are all the benefits humans get from ecosystems. Can you give us some concrete examples, particularly for someone living in Bali?
Absolutely. Think about the things we need to live well. Clean air and water, fertile soil so we can grow food, protection from the ocean eroding the coast, and even stuff like timber and medicinal plants.
Right. These are all things we get from forests.
Yeah. Ecosystem services that forests provide, often without us even realizing it.
So if we keep losing forests, it's not just about trees. It's about losing the very things that allow us to live well in Bali. How would that actually affect people?
Imagine Bali with way less fresh water.
Oh, wow.
Because the soil's eroded and rainfall patterns have changed from deforestation. That would hurt agriculture, tourism, and even basic sanitation. And coastal communities, they'd be way more vulnerable to storms and rising sea levels because the mangrove forests that protect them are gone.
Okay, I'm convinced. Deforestation is a huge problem with some serious consequences. But what can we do about it? The sources talk about sustainable forest management strategies as one solution. What does that even mean?
Well, sustainable forest management, it's kind of a big umbrella term. It covers lots of different approaches, but the main idea is to use forests in a way that meets our needs now without messing things up for future generations.
So like finding a balance between using the forest and making sure it stays healthy?
Exactly. It's about understanding that forests are more than just sources of wood or land for development. They're vital for biodiversity, for climate regulation, for the well-being of people.
So managing them responsibly means we can benefit from them now and in the future. It seems like there are a lot of different strategies for doing that. How do we know which ones actually work?
That's where things get tricky.
Yeah.
It takes careful planning, scientific research, and monitoring. What works in one place might not work somewhere else. You have to choose the right tools for the job based on the specific ecological and socioeconomic conditions of the region.
That makes sense. I'm particularly interested in community-based forestry because it focuses on giving local communities more control. I'm curious, what are some of the benefits and challenges of this approach in Southeast Asia? Are there any new and innovative models emerging?
That's a great question, and one that deserves a deep dive of its own. Community forestry, when done right, can be super effective. It recognizes the rights and knowledge of the people who live in and around the forests. They often have a deep understanding of how those forests work and a real interest in seeing them thrive.
Yeah, it makes sense that if you give communities ownership and control over the forests, they'll be more likely to manage them sustainably. Are there any real-world examples of this working in Southeast Asia?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a great example right here in Cambodia with the Kiosema Wildlife Sanctuary.
Perfect. So let's talk about that next.
So the Kiosema Wildlife Sanctuary, it's a really cool example of how community forestry can be good for both people and the environment.
Okay.
It's protecting habitat for endangered species,
Yeah.
helping local communities make money through things like ecotourism and harvesting stuff from the forest that isn't timber.
That's amazing.
Mm.
But are there downsides to this approach? Like, what's stopping communities from just taking too much if they're in control?
You bring up a good point. There are definitely risks. It's not like a magic solution that works everywhere. For community forestry to really work, you need strong governance, clear rules, and constant monitoring to prevent people from doing things that aren't sustainable. And you need to build trust and make sure the communities have the knowledge and resources to manage the forests responsibly.
So it's more complicated than just saying, here's the forest, you're in charge now.
Yeah, it takes planning, collaboration, and ongoing support.
What are some other sustainable forestry practices being used in Southeast Asia?
Well, there's agroforestry, which is basically incorporating trees into farming systems.
Oh, yeah, like planting trees alongside crops.
Exactly. It can help improve the soil, give farmers more sources of income, and create landscapes that are more resilient and biodiverse.
I've heard about agroforestry projects in Bali, where they plant things like coffee or cacao with fruit trees and timber species. It seems like a smart way to make farming more sustainable and profitable.
Right. And it takes some pressure off the remaining forests by giving people other options for income and resources. Then there's the concept of payment for ecosystem services.
Okay, what's that?
Basically, communities or landowners get paid for managing their forests in a way that benefits everyone.
Oh, I see. So instead of just cutting down trees for a quick buck, they're rewarded for protecting them because those forests provide long-term value.
Exactly. And it's not just about money. There's a growing understanding of the cultural and spiritual value of forests, especially in Southeast Asia, where a lot of indigenous communities have deep connections to nature.
I remember reading about a community in Borneo that successfully protected their sacred forests from logging. It was inspiring to see them stand up and use their traditional knowledge to fight for conservation.
That's a great example of how cultural values can drive conservation efforts. It shows that forests aren't just commodities. They're an essential part of healthy ecosystems and vibrant cultures.
Okay, so we've talked about some really cool solutions in Southeast Asia. But zooming in on Bali specifically, what are some unique challenges and opportunities there when it comes to deforestation and sustainable forestry?
Well, Bali is dealing with a lot of pressure because it's become such a popular tourist destination.
Right.
And that means more demand for land, resources, and infrastructure, which often comes at the expense of forests.
Yeah, the sources talked a lot about how tourism is impacting Bali's mangrove forests. They're being cleared for hotels and resorts, even though they're super important for protecting the coastline and fisheries.
It's a classic example of how hard it is to balance economic development with environmental protection. For Bali to be successful in the long run, it has to find ways to promote sustainable tourism that benefits both the local communities and the environment.
It's not all bad news, though, right?
Yeah.
There are some awesome reforestation projects happening in Bali. Like, I was really impressed by the West Bali Agroforestry project. What stood out to you about that one?
I think what's exciting about that project is that it has this multifaceted approach.
What do you mean?
It's not just about planting trees, it's about fixing degraded landscapes, empowering local communities, and creating sustainable ways for people to make a living. They've planted a diverse mix of native trees, including some that provide valuable things like fruit, timber, and medicines.
So it's like a win-win-win situation.
Yeah, it makes reforestation more economically viable and ensures that the community benefits.
It seems like a very holistic approach, tackling multiple problems at once. What kind of long-term impact can projects like this have on the landscape and the people?
Well, over time, these kinds of projects can really help. They can rebuild soil fertility, improve water retention, boost biodiversity, and create ecosystems that can bounce back from challenges. And that's not just good for the immediate community, it benefits the whole region by lessening the impact of climate change and providing those valuable ecosystem services.
So they're planting seeds for a better future, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. But I'm sure you can imagine it's not always easy to implement these big projects.
Yeah. What are some of the obstacles they face?
One big challenge is land degradation. Years of deforestation and bad land management practices have left a lot of areas in Bali with really poor soil.
Oh, that makes sense.
It makes it hard for trees to grow. So before you can even start reforesting, you have to invest in restoring the land.
I'm also seeing that inconsistent rainfall and invasive species are becoming bigger threats. It sounds like they're constantly fighting an uphill battle.
It is tough, and that's why you need flexible management strategies that are tailored to each specific location. You have to work with nature, not against it.
So there's no quick fix. It takes long-term commitment, scientific expertise, and community involvement to make sure these reforestation efforts are truly sustainable.
Absolutely. And it also means tackling the root causes of deforestation, which are often more than just environmental. We need to look at the economic and political systems that encourage deforestation and find ways to shift those incentives towards conservation.
And that brings us to something the sources kept mentioning: corruption. It sounds like even with the best plans and projects, corruption can totally derail conservation efforts. Can you talk a bit more about how that plays out with deforestation?
Sadly, corruption is a problem in many parts of the world, and it can have a really terrible impact on efforts to protect our forests. We see illegal logging operations being allowed to continue even though there are rules against it, bribes being paid to get permits for deforestation, and money that's supposed to be used for reforestation being pocketed by corrupt individuals. It's a breach of public trust and a major roadblock to achieving sustainable forest management.
It's so disheartening to know that's happening, often with the involvement of people in power. But what can we do to fight against a problem that seems so deeply rooted?
It's not an easy task.
Yeah.
But there are organizations and individuals out there working hard to expose corruption, push for stricter laws and enforcement, and promote transparency and accountability in the forestry sector.
I'm seeing things about investigative journalism, whistleblower protections, and initiatives that give local communities the power to hold those in power accountable. It seems like we need a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. It requires collaboration between governments, civil society organizations, businesses, and individuals. We need to create a culture where corruption isn't tolerated, and those who exploit forests for their own personal gain face consequences for their actions.
It's a good reminder that protecting forests isn't just about planting trees. It's about addressing the deeper issues that drive deforestation, like greed, corruption, and a lack of accountability. This is a complex problem that needs systemic change.
You're absolutely right. But even with all that, I think it's important to remember that there's still hope.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many people around the world who are passionately dedicated to protecting forests and building a more sustainable future.
I agree. Throughout this whole deep dive, we've seen inspiring examples of individuals, communities, and organizations that are working so hard to make a difference. From indigenous communities protecting their ancestral lands to scientists coming up with innovative reforestation techniques, there's a growing movement of people who aren't willing to just accept the way things are.
But it's not just about the people on the front lines, is it?
No, not at all.
What do you mean?
Consumers are becoming more aware of the impact their choices have. They're demanding sustainably sourced products. And businesses are starting to realize that deforestation isn't just bad for the environment, it's bad for business in the long run. More and more companies are adopting zero deforestation policies and investing in sustainable supply chains.
So there's this growing awareness that we all have a role to play in protecting forests, whether it's through the things we buy, the way we advocate for change, or by supporting organizations that are working on the ground. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway we want listeners to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the future of our forests, it's not set in stone.
We can actually make a difference. If we understand the issue, make smart choices, and support those who are protecting our forests, we can create a world where people and nature both thrive.
I like that, a message of hope.
Mm.
We don't have to just sit back and watch our forests disappear. We can be part of the solution.
Yeah.
But how can we, as individuals, actually make a difference? I mean, we're thousands of miles away from these rainforests. What can we really do?
There's actually a lot you can do. First off, just educate yourself, learn about the issue, talk to your friends and family about it.
Spread the word.
Yeah. The more people understand what's going on, the more likely we are to see real change. You can also support organizations working to protect and restore forests.
So like donating to conservation groups.
Exactly. But it goes beyond donations. The choices you make every day, they have an impact too.
Okay, how so?
When you're shopping, choose products that are sustainably sourced, look for certifications from organizations like the Forest Stewardship Council.
Right.
And avoid things that contribute to deforestation, like products with unsustainable palm oil.
I've definitely been seeing more products with those certifications, which is good. Seems like people are starting to demand better.
That's great to hear. It really shows that consumer demand can make a difference. And don't forget about advocacy. Reach out to your elected officials and tell them to support policies that promote sustainable forest management and stop illegal logging. Hold businesses accountable for their environmental practices.
So we can use our voices and our wallets to make a difference, even from far away. It's good to know we're not powerless in this.
Exactly. And remember, even the little things can add up to make a big impact. If we all do our part, we can create a better future for our forests, for everyone.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into deforestation. We hope you learned some stuff and that you're feeling inspired to take action. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, so stay tuned. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.